Welcome to the fifth public discussion in the University of Chicago's Poverty, Promise, and Possibility Initiative. Thanks for joining us on this very cold evening. I'm Bart Schultz, the director of the Civic Knowledge Project, which is one of the partners behind the Poverty, Promise, and Possibility Initiative, along with the Office of Civic Engagement, the Graham School of General Studies, the Urban Education Institute, and our wonderful hosting institution, the School of Social Service Administration. Thanks to all of them. Before introducing our speaker this evening, I hope you'll pardon me for making just a few brief announcements. First of all, I hope everyone does have one of these brochures and the other information out there. Make sure pick one up if you don't. It will give you more information about the Poverty, Promise, and Possibility series. The bottom line is that we really want to see all of you joining us again and again and again for future events in the series. We're really trying to build a crowd, build a community, get a lot of practical projects going, in fact. Feel free to contact me if you have some ideas, some suggestions, need more information, anything of that nature. Also, be sure to visit our relatively new website, newly launched in January. It's very easy to find, http://povertyinitiative.uchicago.edu. There's a wealth of information up there, including videos of the previous public discussions, other events in the series. So please do check out the website. Eventually, this evening's event will be up there as well. Just a couple of words, too, of thanks. Again, I'd like to thank the School of Social Service Administration for allowing us to use this wonderful space. The lobby, the staff here has been absolutely terrific. Sid, Ifra, everyone. Their faculty is deeply involved in the Poverty, Promise, and Possibility Initiative. I'd also like to take this opportunity to thank Sonia Malunda, who is sitting over there from the Office of Civic Engagement. Please give her a hand, if you will. There's one of my favorite book dedications simply reads, "Without whom not," and I think that applies to Sonia Malunda. She's been instrumental in making this initiative happen. So very glad to see her here with us tonight. As I say, we're happy to talk to you about everything going on in the series, try to build up new programs, new workshops, and so forth. Please do stay in touch and join us again. So, on with this evening's event. Poverty, Promise, and Possibility is really very much an interdisciplinary effort that reflects the characteristic University of Chicago emphasis on bringing together very different fields, the humanities, the social sciences, medicine, and so forth, bringing these together, bringing them to bear on research and on practical policy initiatives. Our speaker this evening, really perfectly embodies all of these wonderful University of Chicago features. Its vibrant humanism, interdisciplinary research, public commitment, civic engagement. Charles M. Payne is the Frank P. Hixon Distinguished Service Professor in the School of Social Service Administration at the University of Chicago. He's also an affiliate of the university's Urban Education Institute. His interests include urban education and school reform, social inequality, social change, modern African American history. His books include I've Got the Light of Freedom, The Organizing Tradition in the Mississippi Civil Rights Movement, and So Much Reform, So Little Change, a powerful account of why urban school reform efforts have so often failed. Recently, he has been very much engaged with the Woodlawn Children's Promise Zone initiative, where he has brought his expertise to bear on the situation in the public schools in our neighborhoods here on the South Side. He really is, as I say, everything that the Poverty, Promise, and Possibility Initiative is supposed to be about. So please give Charles Payne a very, very warm welcome.
I want to thank Bart both for that very generous introduction and for doing this series, for thinking it up. I mean, it's a wonderful idea, and I think it's a great time. I want to thank all of you for braving the hawk, for coming out in this beastly weather. It is a remarkable testament to the breadth and depth of the community being built at the university, in my adopted neighborhood of Woodlawn, in the largest city of Chicago, the community of people who are concerned about the future of urban youngsters, right? I mean, you're testament to that, and it's just wonderful to see. Let me tell you now, in all honesty, that this is a talk that's not going to work, right? I thought it through and I'm fairly certain. The original idea for this talk, right, was that I was going to say something like, given the research of the past decade or two, which has been quite good, it's just qualitatively better than what we had 20 years ago, right? What do we know with some confidence about changing urban schools for children at scale? What do we know, right? And then given, you know, the other stuff that's out there, the most creative and dynamic districts, which have not been thoroughly enough documented to call it research, right? What could we infer? What guesses can we take about where we are? And so then you have a discussion about just where we are in terms of turning around urban schools. All right, well, that's fine. I should have just left it there. I got this bright idea that I would combine that with the fact that we are in the midst of a mayoral election, and everybody running has a platform on education, right? So suppose we were to look at these platforms through the lenses of what we have learned. I'm doing this because that's a real complex phrase, what we have learned, right? Suppose we were to look at the platforms of the candidate through the lenses of what I think we should have learned in the last 2 decades. That's a more precise and accurate language, right? Well, I mean, the problem, so that's what I have set up, and the problem with that is that's a lot of ground to cover, okay? So I'm literally going to race through some parts of this. Don't worry, you're going to get the main parts. And I'll tell you now, guarded optimism, I mean, to use a phrase that I've used once or twice before. I am trying to say that on the one hand, I am firmly convinced that we are at a moment of enormous promise, right, in terms of our ability to crack this thing and our ability to produce the kinds of schools that can give youngsters the kinds of lives we want them to do, and to not do that in a boutique way, not 1 or 2 good schools. We are near the point where we can begin talking about reform districts. I can remember in the 1980s when we had 1 or 2 schools in this country that we could point to as exemplars of what urban kids could do under the right circumstances. We used to have just a few schools. Now we can talk about entire cities that are getting close, right? It's an entirely different discourse. That's the good news. The bad news, it's not clear to me at all that we as a nation have the capacity to learn from success. Right? It is one of the defining characteristics of urban school systems that they cannot learn from their own experience. They do it wrong today, they do it wrong tomorrow, and you can bet they'll be doing it wrong next week. They have no capacity to learn, right? As a civic community nationally, we may be in that same situation. That's the bad news, right? So, yeah, there is promise and there is peril, to use an overused title. So, the specific questions I'm going to try to address. Which urban school systems are improving, right? This is what we might call an underreported phenomenon, right? That we now have something in the range, depending on what kind of criteria you wish to invoke, not less than 10, perhaps not more than 20 or 25 urban school systems which really seem to be doing things which are not about merely raising test scores, but literally about changing the life chances of children, of youngsters. Why are they improving? Well, the honest answer is your guess is as dang near as good as mine. We don't have the kind of analytical data that would allow a real discussion about that, but that won't stop me from standing up here and giving you my best guesses, right? I'm actually supposed to be writing a book about that right now, but all these people from Woodlawn got in the way, and I haven't written a word in a year, right? How does that connect to the Chicago research tradition? For right now, for purposes of these discussions, I just want to reduce the Chicago research tradition to two things. All the folk at the University of Chicago, perhaps James Heckman is the best known off campus, who have created an important body of literature on early childhood, and then Melissa and her colleagues and what they have done in the consortium to give us a picture, a reliable picture with a great predictive value of what urban schools look like when they get better. Right? And then I want to sort of take all of that kind of stew and put it together and ask, how do the folk who are running for the mayor of Chicago think about that? And how does their thinking compare to that research? How does their thinking compare to what you see in the most dynamic districts in the country? Okay? That's a lot, I know, right? So do not be surprised that I'm glancing through, and especially this first part, describing these districts. The numbers don't matter. All I am trying to make the point is that there are a number of places, many of them places that you would not guess, I suspect, right, that are posting some results which are really indicative of a kind of change we have not been able to discuss in urban school systems in the last 40 years. And of course, I'm going to start not with a district, but with everybody's favorite state, the state of New Jersey. It should be your favorite state. And of course, I'm assuming it's up there. It should be your favorite state because it's my state. It's where I'm from, right? Most of what I'm saying you can find, well, actually the most accessible book is Linda Darling Hammond's The Flat World of Education. Oh, hell, this is one of those things. One of the most recent NAEP. By and large, I think the two best metrics we have for this kind of discussion, the National Assessment of Educational Progress, which is much stiffer, much more substantive test than most state tests. And the other is just high school graduation rate, because we know that if kids get out of high school with a decent diploma, a diploma that actually represents some set of skills, that changes all kinds of life chances. In fact, I would argue that it's arguably, I'd like to have this discussion with Melissa sometime, more important than test scores within the range of test scores that we ordinarily discuss, right? We may come back to that. New Jersey, that much maligned state, on the NAEP is among the top five in every grade and subject level. It leads the nation in writing performance. It substantially reduced racial achievement gaps. The average black or Latino student in the state of New Jersey outscores the average student in the state of California. New Jersey has the highest overall high school graduation rate. There's still gaps among different groups. It's close to the highest high school graduation rates for black and Hispanic students. And just to make a rhetorical point, New Jersey is a state where the teachers' unions are very strong, and where 45% of all students are students of color, right? Do anyone know what I'm referencing? You know, Waiting to Superman and that whole dialogue about the problem of these unions, and if you don't move these unions, yada, yada, yada. That's just what that is, yada, yada, yada. No, I'll say this much now. I don't think anybody who is following what's happened in New Jersey over the last couple of decades doubts that in some way that we cannot trace empirically, this is related to the 1997 Abbott Supreme Court decision in New Jersey, in which the New Jersey Supreme Court said that the 28 urban districts had to be funded at a level comparable to a certain group of wealthy suburban districts, right? So it's a massive transfer of wealth. It's a massive transfer of wealth, right? From wealthier to less wealthy school systems. Last year, the city, everyone knows that in Chicago, which is not among the city's poorest, the country's poorest school districts, we're somewhere in the middle. We spend between $8,000 and $9,000 per year per child. Newark spent $20,000 last year per child. Trenton, New Brunswick were very close to that. They're in the high teens, right? Last year in across the state of New Jersey, in those 28 districts, 75% of all 3- and 4-year-olds in those 28 districts, actually it's now 31 districts, right? 75% of 3- and 4-year-olds were in preschool. right? That is an enormous number across a state of that size. And by the way, nobody that I know denies that the Abbott money was largely wasted in the early years, because school systems which don't have leadership, which haven't had it and haven't had resources, don't do well with it. The one thing that seemed to make a difference early on was preschool, almost from right out of the gun. The preschool changed numbers and changed outcomes for kids, even when the schools were quite mediocre. This year, everybody's favorite story has been Baltimore. New York City has produced, oh, that got cut off, fine. New York City has produced a lot of the strongest superintendents around the country right now. There's a whole history of them. That's opposed to, say, Baltimore. And one of the things that Baltimore has done a remarkable job of in 3 years is to change the dropout patterns, especially for black students, so that cutting the annual dropout rate in half, cutting the number of black males dropping out more than in half, citywide dropout, well, I already said that, graduated 12% more of its black male students in 3 years. The 3 years is interesting. I mean, Chicago, which has not done great on national metrics. Chicago has not done very well against the NAEP, right? It's done a lot on the ISAT, but the ISAT is such a weak and non-predictive test that's nothing to write home about. What Chicago has done well, or did do well in the Duncan years, was change high school graduation. It went up about 10% over the course of the Duncan years. But that's over a longer period than 3 years. Right? So to change the rate that much for black males in 3 years, that's really aggressive, that's impressive work, and like I was saying, we know that that's highly likely to change the outcomes for, all right, one day. Now presumably, after I talk for a while, New York City will come up on the top of this slide, right? Because I am now about to say, New York was a city that for me, partly because I'm not so crazy about the business-oriented conservative reforms. That's just my bias, right? And so that's what New York claims to be doing, right? You hear all of that, right? But for a lot of folk, New York has been posting these glitzy test numbers for over a decade now, right? Almost a decade. And it was fairly clear that the New York State test has been inflated, it's been devalued. It wasn't clear that what looked like change in New York was real change. Well, this fall, a group of folks sat down and took every piece of data they could find on New York, well, this fall and the spring. And I think at this point, I don't know very many people who doubt New York has changed. New York, with 1.1 million students in those schools, has made substantial progress on some of the most important measures, and it's real. Those test scores are inflated, but if you look at the relationship between those inflated test scores and graduation rate, the test scores predict graduation rate, right? So even though we know they're fuzzy in one sense and the passing score is lower than it used to be, it still is predicting something important in children's lives. That's what a test is supposed to do. I mean, that's one measure. On the NAEP, which is, again, more serious than the New York State test, certainly, and the lower grades through grade 5, the city of New York substantially outpaced the state of New York as well as the rest of the nation. So that's also true for its SAT scores. They outpaced the state and the nation. At the same time, they increased the numbers of black and Hispanic students taking the SAT. 60% more students are taking the SATs than 4 years ago, and 50% more are passing the SATs if you define the passing grade as a 500 verbal. One of the most impressive sets of, no, this is out of order or something. But anyway, one of the things that New York did that literally amazed me was create hundreds of small high schools in a very small period of time. I can remember arguing vociferously with some of the folk who were designing it when they were designing it. You can't open this many schools in this short a period of time and have quality. Well, looking back, I could have been a little bit wrong about that, right? I'm quoting from a recent study by MDRC of 123 of New York City's small schools of choice. Small, academically non-selective, four-year public schools. They were authorized by a demanding competitive process. They designed to stimulate new ideas from educators. The resulting schools emphasize strong, sustained relationships between students and faculty. I'm emphasizing that system because the consortium has a body of research on small schools in Chicago that says when schools had those kinds of strong relationships, students came to school more in Chicago, they failed fewer courses, they were more likely to graduate, right? How old does that work, Melissa? 5 or 6 years? So 5 or 6 years ago, the city of Chicago had a body of data about the power of small schools done well. It's not the number of people, it's the quality of the relationships, right? And the number of people can facilitate, but doesn't shape the quality of relationships. Small schools done well can improve youth outcomes. That's the point. So anyway, now to come to this errant slide. At the end of freshman year, on track, the percent of students on track to graduate is about 10% higher in the small schools than in matched comparison schools. The graduation rate, after the first 4 years, was about 7% higher. And that's one would expect the schools to do better over time if they have that kind of leadership. And this says it wrongly, but the impact was greatest actually on Black and Latino males, were the ones who got the greatest competitive advantages from these schools. Right? I almost decided to skip this. Well, I guess I did skip it because it's not there. There was supposed to be a set of slides about Atlanta, and I was going to skip it because Atlanta's in the midst of a great controversy right now over, it's clear that it's real clear that on the state tests, there have been a pretty substantial amount of cheating in the city of Atlanta. I have not found any reason to say that, to think that cheating was on the NAEP. Atlanta, since 2002, is the only urban district to demonstrate significant improvement in all grades and all subjects on the NAEP. I have never heard anybody say that the records on absenteeism, which is a measure we don't use enough, have changed. Between 1999 and 2008, the percentage of students who were chronically truant in the city of Atlanta dropped from 33% to 15% in elementary school. And here I want you to hear these numbers, right? 33% of all the elementary school students in the city of Atlanta were chronically truant, right? From 45% to 12% in middle school, and from 60% to 34% in high school. Bob, off the top of your head, can you say what percentage of Chicago's high school students you consider chronically truant?
I'm not sure what that number is.
Okay, I mean, I know your office has generated, it's high, it's comparable.
Not the annual number is about 46,000 students in the city of Chicago that are chronically truant by the end of the school.
Okay, so hear that, that's
That's about 10, a
little over 10% of all the students are chronically truant. The city's graduation rate has increased 30% from 2009 to 2002 to 69% in 2009. So you may want to, you want to be critical. You can put Atlanta on the side. I still suspect the Atlanta story is a real story, but I don't need any particular city to make the case that I want to make. I am not surprised if you introduce accountability, you're going to get cheating, right? You put more pressure on people to do a difficult job that not all of them understand, then some people are going to cheat, and especially if you're attaching very important consequences to that. Now, there are enough other stories. Austin, Texas, which is one of the earlier, Montgomery County, Maryland, which is one of the best documented. If you want to read the How Did They Do It book, then I think the best How Did They Do It book is probably Stacy Childress's on Montgomery County, which is Leading for Equity. The book that I think more or less started the scholarly conversation in this generation of scholars. That's not a book, it's an article by Fred Doolittle called Islands of Success, right? It's about 10 years old. So over a period of 10 years, we're beginning to get a little scholarly literature about this, but it's still small and it's embryonic. Philadelphia, 8 consecutive years of improvement, all grades, all subjects, against a really again, the Pennsylvania state test is considered stiff. Many of you know Tim Knowles. I don't know that in fact, when I was doing this, it occurred to me we've never asked Tim, who was the associate and superintendent for instruction in Boston, to tell the Boston story. There was a time at which it was clearly the leading big district, right? And Tim was very closely involved in all the human capital work that was going on underneath that, and it would be very instructive for many of us to hear him tell that story. So all I am saying then, right, is that I understand that when we have time to subject all these stories to scrutiny, and all of them are going to look as good under closer scrutiny. I get that. I think that's inevitable. That's not my point. My point is there is an awful lot of stuff out there that you, this well-informed, deeply concerned audience, I suspect did not have a coherent sense of all of these things happening, right? All of this movement in so many cities and so many different kinds of cities. I am not saying that we should understand it in this way or that way. I am saying we need to be having a debate about this stuff. We need to be trying to figure out what is going on in this stuff. And so far as I can see, outside of a small group of scholars and practitioners, there is no national discourse about why some big, tough urban districts are getting better, right? There is no discourse about that. What's the discourse we have? What is right now the dominant discourse about urban schools? It's waiting for Superman, right? It's, oh, woe is us. We have tried everything. There's this, the silliest line, right, in all American film work in the last decade has got to be that line at the end of that film where they say, we have tried money and it didn't work. That is just so ahistorical, decontextualized, and just plain wrong. Right? Our national discourse is about bad teachers and how you get rid of them. It is about unions and how they are a break. It is a bitter, contemptuous discourse for educators, right? I don't think anybody in this audience can talk as long as I can about the things that urban teachers do wrong. I can talk for a long time about the evils of unions. But to stand up here and say that unions, for anybody to say that they're the heart of the problem, that bad teachers are the heart of the problem, that's a fundamental misunderstanding, right? That's mistaking a symptom for a cause. So far as I can see. I want to be very clear that so far as I can see, what this discourse does, this discourse that says all is hopeless, we've tried everything, the liberals have had their chance and they have failed, the educators have had their chance and they have failed, and if you will allow me to say it in this hall, the social workers have had their chance and they have failed. Then what follows from that? What follows from that? Well, we have to do charters. Got to do something radically different. We have to do merit pay. Got to do something radically different. Do you see what I'm saying? Once you accept the ideology of failure, you have created, that gets turned into an argument for a certain set of reforms and policy, and that, I think, many of you understand, that's part of a larger historical trend which, to my knowledge, goes out of the discourse around the war on poverty, is that all public policy aimed at poverty is deemed a failure unless it's market-based, right? Market-based are the only kinds of stuff which are in this public discourse allowed to be, right. Anyway, I may come back to that. I want now, I think, to go to the why question. Remember, I'm making this up, right? Although the truth is now, this world is changing so quickly that if I were doing this 14 months ago, before the most recent NAEP came out, I would have told a different story, right? I had a cleaner story then, and the last round of NAEP complexified it for me, right? If there are, the first 2 points, I'm varying levels of confidence in what I'm saying about, what seems to be driving change. The first two things are the things I am perhaps most certain about, right? It is, as far as I am concerned, virtually impossible to get large-scale change without accountability. Now, we can argue about what form that might take. We can argue about how at different points in the change process accountability should be. I don't see an argument. I consider Terry Mazzani, the current CEO for CPS, a friend and colleague, much respect. He gave a speech maybe 2 weeks ago downtown, in which he referred to something like, we have to end the tyranny of accountability. And if I could have gotten my hands on him at that moment, I would have shaken that man. The idea in a city like Chicago, with its broken schools, that you are going to change these schools at scale without putting pressure on people, without making demands on people, without firing some people, without breaking some careers, is complete hogwash. It cannot happen, right? It is not going to happen. If you can show me a system of this size that has no racism, if you can show me a system of this size that is not characterized by a high degree of distrust among the professionals, including the parents and the teachers, you can show me a system of this size in which the professionals have not developed ingrained habits which are dysfunctional and harmful to children. If you can show me that system, then I can show you how to change schools without accountability, all right? But until we get there, you have got to have not only carrots, not only inducements, you absolutely have to have a stick to do this work, right? Now, if you're Barbara Easton Watkins, who many of you know, and you're at McCosh, you know, a few blocks over there, and it's 19, whenever that was, when she did this remarkable turnaround and took that school from one of the worst schools in the city to one of the best, you can do it on the power of sheer inspiration of your faculty, right? You got 30 people you've got to move that school. You can do that on the basis of personality. You cannot do that in a system with 700 schools, right? You know, which is close to where Chicago is. You have to have some form of accountability to move these systems, all right? And so, you know, when public leaders go around talking about we can do this without accountability, I am just deeply disturbed. And I literally consider it to be racist, because it's an idea which is going to work most to the disadvantage of children of color, right? All those discourses wind up defending the privileges of adults vis-a-vis the privileges of so I'm in a kind of a thing with some colleagues of mine about whether it's appropriate for me to call this stuff racist. I expect to win, right? The other thing which is closely accounted to this, I mean, this makes 2 points for me, right? These systems are deathly stressing the importance of leadership at the building level, right? It's the folk in the field, right? I couldn't get all of these figures in time, but, and Tim knows he's not in the audience, is he? Because he knows some of this stuff by heart. It's fairly say that in three of the great cases, right? Tom Payne, what he did in Boston. Tony Alvarado, I consider the first great urban school system, right? Almost 3/4 of what I'm talking about is indirectly Alvarado's work, because not only did he do what he did, he trained a core of people who went out and did it elsewhere across the country, right? Payzant in District 2, Payzant in District 4, Beverly Hall in Atlanta. Within 5 or 6 years of their taking over their systems, each one of them had turned over at least 60% of their principals, and before they had left, all of them had turned over at least 80% of the principal core in their cities, right? Beverly Hall wound up creating an entire principal academy in which all principals coming in through the Atlanta school system in the last 5 years of her tenure were trained by her people and her people only. And obviously, they're being trained largely around issues of instruction, right? If there's one generalization even though the data are old, I'm pretty sure it's still true. Dick Elmo's national survey of how principals spend their time, less than 10% of principal time across the country is spent on anything remotely connected to instruction. Our principals are largely building managers and administrators, right? And that is nowhere more true than it is in our cities. So changing leadership, which is a part of a larger set of strategies of changing human capital. And my sense, and here I don't think I know as much as I do about some of the other points, that in most of the cities which have done a lot better, changing human capital has meant developing the people you already have. It has meant, Boston's famous, increasing the professional development budget by a factor of 6, which is not to be sneezed at, right? Montgomery County, 4 or 5 years of just constant professional development for the entire teaching corps in the county. These, I am trying to say, these are not Teach for America stories. And I'm not saying this because I have any issue with Teach for America. On the whole, I think it does good. on the whole. There are all kinds of issues with it, right? But it is often held up. It takes up too much time in these conversations. It is often held up as a model of how we're going to do this. All the smart kids from the good colleges are going to come and they're going to teach the poor little kids in the ghetto. That's not going to happen, right? The workforce that has to do this work is the workforce largely that is right there right now. Right? And certainly you do have to move some people out. But we have to learn to have higher expectations of what the workforce there can do with appropriate support. Resources, right? Here's my favorite example of this thing, right? If there is any city in this country that has said, look, we are business people, we're accountants, right? We are the spreadsheet people, and we're going to run some schools. It's New York City, right? Bloomberg, Klein. Anybody want to take a guess as to how much more money the cities of New York spend per child per year today than they did when Bloomberg took office? How about you try $6,000 per child per year? Remember I said the whole city of Chicago, all we spend is $8,000 or $9,000 a year, right? New York, under Bloomberg, the presumably conservative mayor, he's acting like a tax and spend liberal, right? And people are not calling him out for it. That's one example. I already told you about the Abbott districts in New York. Montgomery County Superintendent Jerry Weiss did something I did not think was possible until he did it. He told the rich people in Montgomery County that he was going to take the best principals from their schools, take the best teachers from their schools, and take money from their schools and send them across to what he called the red districts, the schools that did not have, where you had a higher number of low-income students. I did not think that was politically possible, right? And I still don't know I don't know how generalizable this is, right? He may have been able to get away with things because of who he was and where he was and stuff like that. But if you had asked me 10 years ago if it's possible to take resources from the privileged and openly give them to the less privileged, I would have been very skeptical, right? But anyway, that's the pattern in Montgomery County. Resources follow needs. Intentionality rate, quality of instruction. All I'm trying to say is that certain kinds of decisions which used to be left up to the teacher. You go in your classroom, you close your door, and that's your world. Principal comes in 2 or 3 times a year to do a 10-minute evaluation. But what else happens, that's on you, right? That world has been destroyed in these cities, and each of them do it in different ways. But the issue of what is taught, to whom it is taught, by whom it is taught, is controlled much more carefully. And in each one of these cities, it looks differently, right? Some of them are controlling the curriculum. Boston was pretty much saying, we care about your teaching style more than the content of the curriculum. We want an exploratory teaching style, and we're going to support you in doing that. Sometimes it comes fairly close to what I think of as direct instruction, but only in a very, very limited number of cases. That is, where everything a teacher does is tightly controlled, it's tightly scripted, it's tightly structured. But what these systems seem to be doing on the whole is taking a great deal more responsibility for the delivery of instruction. That's absolutely clear, even though they do it different. One of the things that I am most, in the last year or two, partly because of the work in Woodlawn, I'm coming to have a clearer understanding of. I used to poo-poo the people talking about data can change schools. Now that I've seen it, I stopped poo-pooing it, right? One of the things, and I should have realized this, you guys remember Paul Vallis? You guys are fairly young, right? But 1995, the first corporate superintendent in Chicago. One of the things he used to do was call principals in those offices and say, how come your school is failing? And then the principals would start what was then the standard Chicago principal-teacher rap. These kids don't care, the parents don't come on report card day, no one's taking care of them, all these kids see is violence on the street, they don't have any vision of a future, it's not my fault, I'm doing as well as I can with kids, with these kinds of kids and these kinds of parents. That's what the principals used to say. They used to say it in public. And Paul Vallis, if he did nothing else, right, destroyed that culture in this city. He made it unacceptable for people in leadership positions to say the kids can't do it, right? And what he would do is point to the principal from school A and say, look, here are your scores. Now here's school B. Same demographic profile. School B has better scores. You can explain that to me. Explain that to me. If this school can, why can't you can, right? And Woodlawn, one of the things that I'm just really excited about is learning that parents not only need more data about their own school, Bob Runcie has been a champion in the system, right, of pushing data down to parents, right? That's crucial. But when they have a comparative context that they own, it is even more powerful, right? So what I mean now is that the strongest schools in Woodlawn, by most measures, are or Woodlawn Academy and Duma, which is changing very, very rapidly, right? And now we have parents going around, the parents at Fermi, I just had a conversation a couple of weeks ago with parents at Till, and they're asking the question, why can't we be like Duma? And the question is powerful for them because they know the kids who go to Duma, they know the kids who go to their school, and they know there's no difference. You can't tell those parents there's a difference in the kids, right? And so if there's a difference in the outcome, they're now wondering, what is that school doing? That my school is not. That's very powerful. It's a generative question. But anyway, I've been too long on it because I'm very excited, right, about how we're learning at all kinds of levels. We're doing the same thing with teachers, having teachers compare their data to the other teachers in the building. That's just stops a lot of crap. There's nothing more difficult to cut through in these schools than the ingrained culture of futility. The idea that no matter what you do, these kids aren't learning. And when you begin telling teachers, no, I can document that the teacher across the hall has kids just like you, and that teacher's moving these kids. Well, then that culture of futility, that whole culture is undercut by that. The last thing I will say, and this is perhaps the thing I am least confident about, but perhaps most interested in, right, is that so far as I can see, one of the things that distinguishes some of the most dynamic differences is that while leadership may have, okay, just time checked and realized how far behind I am. To do this kind of work, leadership has to have really strong and deep values, right? And in simple terms, they can be values of the left, values of the right, they can be confused, but these are people who have strong beliefs leading these systems, right? One of the things that I think characterizes, at least take this really as a hypothesis, right? The most successful districts tend to be led by people who show some degree of ideological flexibility. That is, when experience tells them that their core beliefs don't work, then they start moving off those core beliefs. I mean, Bloomberg comes into office talking about, you can educate these kids with the amount of money that we have right now. 3 years later, he's putting more and more money into that system, right? I think he's learned from experiences that the resource base he thought was adequate was inadequate, and he was good enough to take that to heart and to make substantial changes. You see people like Beverly Hall, stone the ball liberal. They hate to use power. They hate to hurt anybody, right? But after they go into these big systems for a while, and after you get your programs failing because nobody's cooperating with you, and because teachers blow you off, and because principals think that you too shall pass, right? After you go through that, you start firing some people, and you start getting a different set of results. You start on whichever end of the political spectrum, and you begin to move toward the middle. But the point I just want to make is that I think the most successful leaders are not dominated by their theories. They're not dominated by their paradigms. They're not dominated by their ideology, right? They have the capacity to learn from their own experience. Anyway, working hypothesis. I want to come back to that in a second. Now, I think what I will do, what am I doing? How many of you have been exposed to the 5 essential supports? Huh? Have, I'm sorry. How many of you have been exposed? All right, that's not adequate. This is the University of Chicago. We need to have a common core course or something like that. It's probably the single most important influential body of research, certainly one of them, to develop in the country in the last decade and a half. It's developed over 20 years of work. It has changed the standard for what educational, it's changed the standard for quality work in education, or it's helped to do that. And I am not going to take much time on this. I just have a couple points I want to make about this. The short version of it is that if you look at schools that are likely to change, among the factors which seem most important are school leadership, which plays a catalytic role and seems to make the other things work, the quality of parent and community ties, the professional capacity of the faculty, the school learning climate. I want to underscore that school learning climate includes, among other things, the degree to which everybody in the building feels safe. In fact, it's my memory that that issue of safety turns out to be one of the more powerful predictors. I just want to come back to that in a moment. And instructional guidance, what I call it another word for what I was calling about the intentionality around instruction. Good instruction does not happen in broken schools accidentally, all right? All I want to say about this right now, and again, maybe we'll see how the questions go. Maybe we will come back to that. If you ask me what underlies this, what is the vision that underlies this research? The vision of, I forgot the tagline. Melissa, if I get it wrong, correct me. If a school is strong, schools which are strong and 3 out of the 5 have a 10 times better chance of improving than other schools. Am I saying that? 10 times better. That's an order of magnitude difference, all right? So we know this is one of the ways to think about what good schools look like, and we know a little bit about the processes which drive them. But if you ask me what this comes down to, what I want to emphasize is that this is a vision of school as organization, right? Every organization needs leadership. Every organization needs shared norms, right? It's about schools as organizations. One, it's about a set of social relationships, parent and community ties. Do teachers and parents trust one another? In fact, I didn't finish, did I? Cool. I think it should be the 6th essential support, but I never win that argument. But the whole issue of social capital, which is exemplified by the degree of trust in schools, is crucially important. Let us just say it that way. All right. And so anyway, all I'm trying to say is that this body of research, which is literally changing conversations and practice across the country, is about organization in large part, and it's about social relationships, right? I'm trying to say that because now here's where we go into our discussion of the mayors. The mayoral platforms. To be honest, when I decided to do this, I said, boy, it'd be great fun to look at these platforms and to pick holes at their weaknesses, because they're going to have a whole lot of weaknesses. These are just politicians after all. The truth is, there is a lot more substance in these platforms, and I'm pleased to say it. There's more substance in these platforms than I was expecting, that's true. But, you can hear the but coming, right? They don't have a sense of schools as organizations. They don't have a sense of schools as social worlds where people are interacting with one another, right? There's this constant notion, if you take this individual out and put this individual in, schools get better, right? So far as I understand this body of research, the implication is that's a shallow way, not a completely false way. It's a shallow way to think about what's going on, all right? And so I'm trying to send this mixed message. There's some promise in what our mayoral candidates are saying, but it does not have the depth that we, to be frank, in Chicago, I think, should expect from candidates in the city, which has generated over a 20-year period in a significant body of research. And I would just say, because all of you know, the research on early childhood says, I think pretty much beyond much dispute, that good, strong investments in early childhood experiences for low-income children pays off with all kinds of dividends down the road, right? It is one of the safest and best social investments. I'm not going to elaborate on it. Now, with that said, let me just spend at least 10 minutes, and Bart, you let me know when I'm getting close to the time. I just want to begin thinking about some of the issues in mayoral platforms, all right? Is that first thing from Mr. Emanuel, is that a good idea? Empower principals and hold them accountable? You like that? I want you to have people have the courage of your convictions so I can disagree with you. You know I'm going to disagree, right? See, it is kind of appealing, right? And I just got through giving you a long, impassioned speech about the centrality, the salience of accountability. This ain't the way to think about it. I would argue it's not the way to think about it. Anybody know why? And I'm picking on this because he says this first, right? So I think this has some rhetorical privilege of play. This is not the way to start this. You know why? Go ahead, Brother Curtis.
Rational decisions, like you were saying, for the pressure on the teachers, same thing that can happen with the principals and things to involve.
Say the last sentence again.
Talked about with the principals, how it's pressure on them, and people can act irrationally and things can happen in the context of school.
I want to say something like that, right? This kind of empower principles. I mean, I know this language is too strong, but that strikes me as giving a loaded gun to children, and that's too strong. It's harsh, and I have lots of respect, and I understand better than most how hard Chicago principals work. I also still maintain they don't have any deep understanding of instruction, right? So if you're empowering a group of people who, for I don't know how long, it's been 20 years of data, in which the 90% of all teachers in the city of Chicago are rated excellent or superior by their principals. Now, what the hell does that tell you, given the outcome of these schools? It tells you how disconnected our principals are from the process of instruction, and how unwilling they are to engage in serious evaluation, right? If principals don't have the confidence to stand up and say to a teacher, no, that is not the way you teach a child a grammar sentence. If you do that, you create these errors. If you do it this way, you avoid those errors, right? If principals don't have that level of confidence, or somebody doesn't have that level of confidence in a school building, right? And you empower people who don't understand the core activity of what it is to do, that just sounds to me like chaos, right? It does not sound, so you can have this, and later on he does talk about principal academies. He gives you no idea what's going to happen in those academies. I'm afraid that we'll go back to what we used to do. The first principals in academies in Chicago were very much, we're going to teach principals to be managers, and once they learn how to be managers of men and women, then they will straighten these schools out. And they had no educational content at all. They had no instructional content at all. They sent them to Kellogg up at Northwestern, and they were going to save us. We need to be saved from Kellogg. But the point is, right, he's taking a good thing, accountability, and he's taking it out of the context in which it's going to work, right? And that's a context in which you have a highly skilled group of leaders, right? One of the most fascinating processes for me has been watching Area 15, I think I can say this, in which the CAO made every principal justify the rating given to every teacher with data. So you're going to say a teacher is excellent? Show me something that happened to the children in that teacher's classroom that says excellence. And every teacher in Area 15 had to be graded that way to the satisfaction of the chief area officer, and her principal spent an entire year doing largely focused on learning how to evaluate teachers at a higher level, right? One of the things, if I'm starting a project right now, it starts with developing instructional leadership and confidence in the people who are going to be carrying that for you, probably principals. All right, so that's one thing from Emmanuel. Let me take one. Let me just say this. About that little innocent language, this is a personal peeve. I don't like people talking about we need innovation in the inner city. I don't like that language. And see, now again, I have my own standards and I'm touchy about some things. But this language feels racist to me. I don't like it. They don't talk about innovation in Evanston. They don't talk about innovation in Winnetka. They say do it right. And they bring the right level of resources to do it right. There's something that implies that we don't know how to teach these strange children of color in the city, right? We don't know what they need. We're spending $8,000. Evanston's probably spending $24,000 per child per year. That's what they need. They need resources, right? They need the caliber of leadership, the caliber of instruction that kids get automatically in Evanston. Let's try that first. If that doesn't work, we can talk about innovation, right? I'm just really suspicious of this idea that if children are poor, there's some great mystery about the fundamentals. And the other side of this, I know how controversial this is, right? You want to ask me what is the greatest example of reform for children of color in this country at scale? It is the Catholic school system. It is and nothing innovative about it, right? Nothing innovative. Hey, I can see we have a few graduates. But they do the fundamental things right. Right? They do the fundamental things right. And I know it's controversial, but and we can go about the weakness of the causal argument. Anyway, I think I don't have any problem with the incentive issue. Let me pick on somebody else. I just find this idea kind of intriguing. England has actually had some success with taking its best principles, and they become principals of two schools, right? Or you're a real principal of one building and you're sort of the supervising principal in another. But no, England, you don't have the disparity in the resource base across schools. One of the things that would worry, this idea is essentially just saying that our best principals should have more than one school. Boy, I could see where that just takes your best principles and stretches them to the point where they're going to be mediocre, right? But the thing I want to say, that's not building capacity, right? It's not developing people. We need to develop more good principles, and there's not enough emphasis across these. I'm sorry?
That's what the chief area officers are today anyway.
They're like super principals.
New principals, they took out the man in school. That's not a new idea.
Yeah. I heard something there, Bob. I'm gonna let it go. No, yeah, no, but I'm not sure there are a whole lot of new ideas in this entire list, right? There are a couple that they're new to me, right? One of the oh, wait a minute. I did want to say this. I did want to call attention to this slide. I just quickly, give me a few comments on this. Call parents to make commitments to their children, enter into a signed agreement. Parents that outlines clear expectations for how parents will help their child outside of the classroom. Can I get a couple comments quickly about whether you think that's a good or a bad and different idea? Parents will sign contracts. Please, stand up and speak loudly. And introduce yourself, please.
I'm from Rebecca. If they're signing an agreement, why aren't the teachers outlining expectations of how they're going to teach the kids?
So a sense of inequity, right?
Yeah. I find this to be the same thing as innovation. Like, obviously, poor parents can't parent their children. They need clear expectations of how they help their kids.
Well, and there's a point, right? No parents in Evanston are being asked to sign. You can argue that may or may not be a fair response, but I'm glad you raised it. Other, please.
I just see a superiority complex coming through there. I know he's a big supporter of the whole Nettlehurst parents movement. I don't know if you guys heard of that, but that's where a whole bunch of moms have a superiority complex about what they do because they went through their Rolodex and they called a bunch of their old friends that were in advertising and here and there, and they reformed their school, and then they write on their blogs that moms on the South Side just don't care about their kids' education enough to go reform the schools.
That's not the attitude of the whole group. There may be some people body that way, but that's not the approach of the people who have to say.
I don't.
I'm a little biased because I don't.
I didn't notice.
Sorry.
No, apologize for what I was teasing. I don't want to focus on the Nettlehurst story because most of us don't have enough information to judge that one way or the other. I do want to underscore what I thought was your main point, that there appears to be an attitude of superiority embedded in this idea. I mean, that's an interpretation. And actually, I had some of the same. And one other reaction to this?
Jennifer Mason from SSA. I'm going to play devil's advocate a little bit now that I have kids in school. And I think on the flip side, it forces parents to engage in the process of educating their kids. And I think I didn't realize until I had kids how much work it would be for me in their out-of-school time to move them along and to drive the train and to be part of this process. So that's a devil's advocate.
Go ahead, Brother Nash, before you bust. That wasn't you? Okay. Please, in the orange sweater.
It makes the assumption that parents are not engaged at all and they're not assisting their children. And there are parents who are in fact involved. Sometimes when we confused about the work that's coming home, that are talking to other parents that have their own kinds of networks. So this assumption that somehow everything needs to be articulated to the parent and they have to be actively engaged. This says to me that they assume that parents are not engaged and they're not trying to help their children outside the classroom. And I found that
Just one or two more. I think a lot of it. These are the two people I saw first. We're going to have them and stop. But we're going to come back to some other issues. Please, 1 and 2.
So in perspective, my issue is not that we should, we're not that we're assuming that they aren't helping, but
why is a signed agreement gonna engage that appropriately, that if they aren't helping, that's gonna fix it? What is it, a signed piece of paper?
That's a great question. That's all I'm gonna say. And the rest of y'all put your hands down, unless you're the young lady with the green scarf. Yes, you. Oh, I'm sorry. The first one.
It assumes that sometimes parents can't help because they might have conflicts, and so it assumes that parents don't know what they need to do to help, that it might be a lack of time. A lot of parents have to work during the time that they might have to help their child.
Well, I mean, that touches on one of my reactions to it. This shows no curiosity whatsoever. Let's accept the fact, all of us who work in urban schools know, parents do or don't do things which infuriate us, right? We see sins of omission and commission on a daily basis, right? So that there is an issue here, that doesn't strike me as worth arguing over, right? What bothers me is the apparent lack of curiosity, and both the last two comments in particular addressed it. There's no sort of thinking about what I would really love to see, I'll be explicit, a political candidate ask. I'd like to see someone like Rahm Emanuel ask the question, what would make me not participate in my child's education, right? Because then that gets around this whole superiority thing, right? Right? Rather than thinking of them as these people who are so different from us, we have to have legal agreements for them that we have for no one else in this society, you begin to ask yourself, you begin with the assumption they ain't no different from you fundamentally. And if there's something that can make them do this, there may be something that can make me do this, and if I can understand that, then I can figure out how to work with those people, right? But the lack of curiosity, are parents overwhelmed, right? A signed agreement is not going to help parents who are just overwhelmed with child care issues, transportation issues, health issues, and job issues. There's nothing to it. Do parents have any reason to believe, parents of color, that the Chicago public school system is on their side? That's a fairly fundamental question, right? You can't assume, we can do a little thing on the literature on trust, right? Poor people tend to not trust. They tend to not trust large institutions in particular. They tend to not trust the representatives of those institutions. When you build trust, and I just got to say, my boy Curtis, SSA grad, who has done some remarkable work, almost doubling the on-track record for freshmen at UCW in a year and a half. And I just want to say that a part of what he is doing is building trust with parents, right? And is driving, I don't know how much sleep he's getting, right? He's spending so much time with parents, but he has built up their confidence. So all that stuff you hear about parents won't do anything when kids are in high school, that's not the case for his parents, because he's built those relationships, right? But anyway, I'm spending too much time on this, but it is the fundamental point that I want to make. This hits on an issue which is a real issue that leadership should be talking about, and it comes up with a shallow and superficial response, which has some notions of exoticizing the people that we're talking about. There's some assumption that they've got to be different from us, and therefore, I know, where is Bart? You're supposed to be running this thing, Bart. All right, anyway, let me see how many, at least, yeah, okay, fine. If there's time, I'll come back to this idea that parents should have, it's the LSC idea taken up another level, right? Parents should have the capacity to close a failing school. Now that's an interesting, I call that in this form a new idea. Right? One of the,
California.
oh, well, it's new on 60th Street, right? One of the things I just wanted to say in passing is that, okay. Something's gone devilishly wrong. Well, you have handouts, don't you? At least some of you do. One of the things I don't know what happened, like there are another 10 or so slides that's supposed to be coming up. Remember the old days in Chicago, in which when somebody ran against you, you'd go out at night and pull down all their signs, right? So there'd be nothing in the neighborhoods. This is the electronic version of that, I guess. Rahm's people somehow got... Yeah. Okay. Devalle starts off with this one. I think it started off. Funding in place so that every child has the opportunity to attend high-quality early childhood education, and then it goes on to, I just want to say that I am a little disappointed that not every candidate, I think there are only 2 candidates who spent significant time talking about early childhood education. And again, some of the folk, I see there are some CPS, I know some CPS folks will disagree with this. My sense is that CPS over a period of a decade has put so much emphasis on the tested grades, grades 3 and up, that they have de-emphasized and drawn resources, especially human resources, away from the early years, right? And again, given the power of the research on this subject, it is really disappointing that the candidates aren't making more of this, right? It is an expensive area, but it is also an area we have every reason to believe the investments pay off over the long term, right? Our candidates get this to some degree, it's not emphasized. I also just want to say that, you know, Duvalier's campaign rhetoric, I'm a guy from the neighborhood, that's kind of reflected here, right? I mean, he's, I think, the only one to talk about city colleges, but in the neighborhoods, that's the next step for a whole lot of folk. The early college programs that he talks about, I don't know this research, but my sense is it's really strong body of research which says early college programs, letting kids get college credit while they're in high school, really does start a lot of kids off in that age a lot better. I mean, there's some interesting ideas here, and some of the other folk aren't hitting. Pat Watkins, I really get annoyed at the number of times I hear people talking about Carol Mosley Braun is the only African-American candidate in the race, you know. It's probably annoying if Pat's a friend of mine, I don't like to see her. But anyway, she's an organizer. Pat has done some of the most effective organizing I have seen in the city of Chicago, and I've been watching this stuff for 30 years, right? She's good. She can turn the folk out. And I'm just saying that because that kind of orientation is reflected in some of the things that she emphasizes that the other folks don't. Before I say that, though, let me note that this as mayor, Dr. Watkins will identify the most highly qualified and innovative educators in the nation to lead the CPS. Now, here's how I think. I don't have any problem with that. I prefer educators. I mean, that's my bent. Preference. It bothers me when somebody says, and Carol Mosley Braun says the same thing, only an educator can do Chicago, right? Now, I said that's my preference. But listen, as best I can say, from all the data I can see, Joel Klein improved the schools of New York City for most people. He knows nothing about education. He almost brags about how little he knows about education, right? If it's the right business person, right? And my sense of the history has been when you have a business person supervising an educator, these sort of combined two-headed monsters that run in many cities, if the business person doesn't understand the educational process, they undermine the educational person because they don't know how to support good work, they don't even know how to recognize it. But to say that that happens often is different from saying that there is no business person that one would ever consider for the city of Chicago. This is what I mean by ideological rigidity. Right? It's a decision which has been made in advance that a whole category of people are just unqualified, right? So I'm just, this is the kind of thing that bothers me. I'll give you another example in a minute. The technology thing. So far as I understand the weight of the research on technology, there's some oversimplification. It says something like this. If your school does not have a culture that supports good teaching and you put computers in it, you will still have a culture that does not support good teaching, but it'll now be electronic. That's all. It's still bad teaching, right? If you can't teach with a chalk and blackboard, you probably can't teach with the internet, right? Because teaching is about attitude and relationship, right? It's about determination. And if you have that and you have all this technology, then you can take kids someplace. And a lot of our schools, you go into them at 3:30, the room that has the most life in it is the computer lab, you know, badly equipped all there. There's enormous potential there, but to sort of lead with that, nah, it is not fundamental. Teaching relationships, get those straight and then put good technology in them, and Shaz, we can talk about that in a second if you want. Now this is something, this point she handles better than most of the others. They're all gonna say, we're gonna get the best teachers in the world to come to Chicago and teach our children. I already gave you my comment on that, right? We're gonna get them, and then Chicago has something like a 50% average turnover rate among teachers every 4 years. That's close enough, right? So yes, and Chicago has improved in the last decade, like a lot of these cities have improved, the quality of the people coming in, and they come in and we have a revolving door. What is that revolving door about? It's about the quality of the relationships in the building. These are unsupportive, difficult environments. You can get good people to try them. You can't get good people to stay, right? So I'm not referring to Pat so much right now. She actually does this better than most. But this emphasis on bringing in world-class educators needs to be matched by an equivalent emphasis on creating the social and political conditions and individual school buildings that will make people want to spend their teaching career in our schools. And that's not here. The social and organizational context is not here. Now, Pat does get some of it here. Reduced turnover rate. She's the only person I think who said that. She refers to grow your own teachers. You know, grow your own teachers starts with people who come from inner city neighborhoods, takes them through a paraprofessional process, takes them all the way through college, and now some of those folk are out teaching. Presumably, we hope they bring back a different kind of social capital, a different kind of relationship, because they grew up in the neighborhoods. They grew up in the neighborhoods we hope that they are teaching in. So that's not just get a good teacher in, it's get a good teacher in who's going to be connected to the people in that building and connected to the people in the neighborhood. That's the other thing that I really like that I don't see in any of the others that I can recall is Pat's emphasis on fair, effective teacher evaluation process. For me, again, it starts there. If we don't have leaders who think they can evaluate instruction, I just don't think we can get any depth with anything else at all. So there's some really good points there. I also want to stress, given how important safety turns out to be for the consortium, I just want to stress that it's disappointing that I think it's only two candidates, Pat and someone else, who explicitly mentioned we got to make these schools safer, right? And again, I suspect that's because he's a parent organizer. That was a parent to talk about first, all right? Is the level of safety in these schools. But anyway, she puts a lot more stress on that than other folks. It's inconsistent with a lot of. The other thing I think that reflects her organizing background is just cultivating youth leadership, about which I'll say more. And then Carol for Chicago. Hire a CPS superintendent, the leader will be an educator. Again, that just seems to me to be a kind of ideological statement. I don't know. I love the idea of investing in the arts. To make neighborhood schools a priority, I believe in that. I think the city, I think parts of the city leadership would now say they have put too much emphasis on charters and specialized schools, shipping kids from Inglewood to Hyde Park, shipping kids from Orr to Clemente, shipping, oh Lord, Bob, you're the expert on this, right? At least parts of the city's leadership, in CPS and outside, is coming to question some of the policies that undermine neighborhood schools over the years. I think that process of questioning those policies needs to be accelerated, but you cannot stand there or sit there and tell me that we don't have some charter schools in the city that are doing some good, right? And that's presumably what's being referred to by privatization. So this kind of sweeping denunciation, does that mean, I don't know, my guess is Donahue, NKO, they've got 6 or 7 parents applying for every slot they have. Does the end of privatization mean that we take those schools away from parents when we know that these schools are serving, some of them? Most of the charters in Chicago, so far as I can see from the limited data we get on charters, are pretty mediocre, all right? But the good ones are life-changing, right? And so while, yes, certainly we need to put, this is what I think of as a kind of rigid ideological statement, no flexibility, no nuance. The truancy thing, I don't have a problem. Gary Chico, I will just say, and I will end this and turn it all over to questions. Good emphasis on early childhood. He's going to dismantle central office and do away with it. I don't have an issue. Giving parents power, that's certainly, it shows respect for the parent and community ties. You can argue this may or may not be the way that you want to operationalize it. He again makes the point, only the best teachers will serve in our classroom. The best teachers will be rewarded and recognized. Chico will personally lead national recruitment missions for teachers. And of course, if a teacher is not performing up to standards in the classroom, Chico will not hesitate to remove that teacher regardless of rank. So I want to say 2 things. I mean, on the Chico list, there are a number of things I think are pretty good ideas. But the way in which he thinks about the teacher The individual good teacher reflects the main point I'm trying to make about these platforms. How shallow is their definition, how their understanding of schools as organizations and as social entities. I would much prefer that this be embedded in the discussions about how we're going to make schools places where these good teachers want to stay, and that's absent. Some way to recognize the social. Let me just say, by way of historical context before I end, that the fact that every politician who's running for mayor in Chicago says we're going to have excellent teachers, you young people cannot recognize what an enormous victory that is. And if you think I'm bragging, I am. It's a victory for the research community in this country. From the time of James Coleman, 1966, to the book by Hanushek and his colleagues, Does Money Matter? It meant Does Money Matter in Schools for Poor Kids, right? And there's an argument among educators which lasts 30 years around whether or not the impact of poverty on children is so dire that what we do in schools doesn't matter. Teaching doesn't matter because the kids are all messed up when they walk in that kindergarten door. That argument existed among the best scholars, and by the way, the Hanushek you see in Waiting for Superman is saying exactly the opposite of what he said for most of his career. Because now he's saying it's the individual teacher who matters, right? Most of his career, he was on the other side of that ledger. So all I want to say first, that the mere fact that the quality of teaching is now accepted by conservatives and liberals across the political spectrum as something that can matter for poor children, that is a new thought. It is a new thought in our discourse. It wasn't there 15 years ago. It was the liberals and the progressives who were always arguing that progressives matter. That's now a consensus point. I want to say I appreciate that. Right? Nevertheless, I also want to say it is embedded in this conception of teachers as in an animistic conception of what teachers and teaching are. The better unit of analysis, I am trying to say, is not the individual teacher, it is the faculty. And my sense of what Catholic schools are doing is they're taking fairly average teachers and they're building strong faculty because of the relationships and the norms in which those individual teachers are embedded. Anyway, there's a little sense of the social, a little sense of the organization, a little sense of capacity building. This is for the students from the social meaning of race class. I end everything with a quote from Lorraine Hainsbury. This is from Young, Gifted, and Black. Take a needle thus, a needle. Peer through the eye of the needle. As much as you can see will be a part of the world, but it will be a true part, will it not? Therefore set down what you have seen and call it the truth. If anyone argues with you, explain to the fool that it's harder to look through a needle than to look around one, right? And her point, right, is that what you're seeing is the truth, you're also taking that truth out of context. And if I wanted my summary sense of these platforms, they see more truth than comparable people would have seen 10 or 15 years ago. They don't see the social and the political context in which this is buried. And so I want to come back to what I said earlier. It seems to me that historically we're at a moment of great promise. We have learned a lot, right? It also seems to me we have made some progress in how we think of these things. It also seems to me that we may not be able to capitalize on what we should have learned because we insist on taking these ideas and reducing them to their simplest form. So with that, finally, let me stop and turn it over to you for questions, comments, and my God, there are people in this argument, in this room who don't do anything but argue, so I would like to hear a few. Go ahead, please.
I was really interested earlier when you were talking about the culture of the failure culture in schools, and you said that a lot of times you've noticed that all public policy aimed at poverty is deemed a failure unless it is market-based. I was hoping you could expand on that a little bit.
I can, and other people can help if you want. Look at the way in which people came to think about the war on poverty, right? The dominant discourse has been that it failed. We put all this money into poverty. Did not fail. We improved health care for parts of the population who didn't have it. We substantially reduced the number of children who did not get fed in this country. We substantially improved housing for significant, and yet it's still regarded, in retrospect, we tried to solve poverty, we invested the resources, and it didn't happen, right? The comparable argument now is that After investing billions of dollars in urban schools, after giving educators enormous resources to work with, these schools are still terrible, they are still failures, right, undifferentiated failure. And therefore, we need to go to choice, we need to go to vouchers, we need to go to merit pay, we need to go to market-based systems, right? Systems which reduce human motivation largely to issues of sanctions, right? Rewards and punishments. Is that, okay?
Why do you, that makes sense. I was sort of wondering, do you have any explanation for why they end up focusing on market-based systems? You're saying just because they prioritize the fact that humans are motivated by punishments for money incentives? Am I summarizing that fairly?
I don't want to give a simple answer to a complex question. I mean, the simple answer is that various versions of market-based theory are favored by people for whom the market has worked, right? That in effect, people are taking their life experience and translating it into theory, which all of us do from our respective social locations. And if your social location is a social location of privilege, the market must have worked for you. And therefore, you begin to extend it out to the market could work for everybody. Again, that's a simplistic, I do think that's a part of it, right? I mean, so just let me leave it there. Anyone else? One.
With the budget, and it sticks out that Chicago's at 8,000, New York's what, 20?
I don't think it's quite there, but it's close. It's close.
Suburbs are at 2024. Can we fix this without making a reallocation of commitment of the city for its dollars?
My public answer to that question is no. My private answer is I'm confused. Let me just say that, right? We know that low-income children, by a number of measures, are starting off behind. Therefore, they need more investments early on, right? So that implies resources should follow need, and the most important resources are not the dollar resources, but the human resources, but they tend to hang out together, as we understand, right? And so that, yeah, and then, if I was speaking to the city club, downtown businessman, it'd be more resources. You guys have got to get your hands off the purse string. And that's fair and that's legitimate. But I'm also saying that as I look at certain schools change, when teachers get a higher level of support, I don't know how far these teachers can go. I just don't know. The teachers we have right now, with the resources we have right now. That's all I can say. My basic stance is, yes, we do need more resources, and I don't know how to balance that against a strong and growing sense that I have that we're getting only a small fraction of the productivity that we can get from the teachers and students who are in place right now. All right? But now the other thing I guess I would add to that, if I look at, say, the University of Chicago charter schools, which on the whole I think have done quite a good job, the level of pressure they put on staff, I don't know that that's sustainable, right? They're getting more out of those staffs than we get out of the average Chicago public school, but boy, how long can you work those 12-hour days, right? I just don't know. And I will brag and say, I think some of the students I send into CPS, or we at SSA send into CPS, are really about the best you're going to find, and they can't take this pace forever. Right, so I am just confused, but this just let me say, until we see otherwise, always bet on, do for our kids what they're doing for privileged kids, and that means a substantial investment in resources. One of the most bitterest moments of my fall is arguing with the principal at Till over whether he could have an algebra lab or an African dance class, because we didn't have the budget to do both, right? It's just such a silly and disgusting, demeaning kind of situation for a principal to be in. We need more resources, all right? Short version. I'm sorry? Oh, Michelle Rhee. She would probably not even appreciate me saying this, but my sense is that she was sort of the paradigmatic ideologue when she came in. beat up on teachers' unions fierce, right? I mean, there was nobody like her until Christie came in New Jersey. And she began to change. I don't know why, right? I don't know why. I will say this about the DC story, right? Remember when I said I used to have a simple narrative about, and I used to just come in these audiences and say, who's changing America, what kind of leaders are changing American schools? They're progressive educators who are instruction, but they also have a strong bent toward accountability. That was a fair and defensible generalization up until about November 2009, because in December 2009, the NAEP came out. DC, New Orleans, and New York all popped it on the NAEP. Right? They all popped it, right? And they all claim to be business-oriented reform cities, right? Again, other things may be going on. But now here's what's interesting about Michelle Rhee, right? What people do not know is you go on the website for the Council of Great City Schools the year before she came, and that council, which used to say DC is the worst system, there ain't no teaching going on in the city of Washington, D.C., because nobody's asking teachers to teach. There is no curriculum in this city, right? There's no philosophy of pedagogy. There's no administration. They have a series of reports over 10 years before she came saying that. But a couple years before, they changed, right? And I can't even remember the language. Something like Clifford Janey, the current superintendent, has introduced order, coherence, and high standards into our curriculum, right? So that what happens, and this is not the only story like this, right? Michelle Rhee came into what had been a classically bad situation, extremely well-funded city, right? Its schools, right? Completely dysfunctional, but they were on an uptick when she came, and we can document this, right? The public has no idea about the uptick because, they just, Washington schools are bad, right? She came in and she did not take that curriculum apart. She left it alone, right? The curriculum that Janey had made out of his sweat and blood, right? So on the one hand, she's talking all this rhetoric about it's the unions and it's the teachers. On the other hand, she's supporting what was a high-quality, progressive, inquiry-based, in some ways, curriculum, the kind of curriculum that a lot of us would be satisfied for our children. So all I'm trying to say is, for all that bluster that has made her a national celebrity, underneath it, I think she is a case of a person who learned that the fairly simplistic ideas she had when she came in don't fit. And she backed off some of that rhetoric. So that's all I can say. But I can also say, that the word I get from folk in Washington is that sense of arrogance. And this is something a lot of the business-oriented reformers have got to get straight, right? Because this notion that the citizen, the parent is a client, and the client has the right of exit. If you don't like these schools, you go to another school. If you don't like me running them, after 4 years, you vote me out, right? That undermines a certain kind of civic culture that Americans are used to, right? And I think Bloomberg, who barely squeaked in his reelection, Fenty, who didn't squeak in, right, were reaping the harvest of what comes off the voters. I mean, forget who used this phrase, but an attitude of superiority. We know better than you what's good for your children, right? And we don't even have to talk to you. We don't have to persuade you. We don't have to engage you. We know, right? So I think that's Michelle Rhee. 1, 2, 3.
What would you say in terms of teacher preparation is important, like teachers coming directly out of their education?
If any of the UTEP people, I'm sorry, the question is what kind of teacher preparation makes sense? How do we make sure that teachers are well prepared? I think one of the powerful models that again, Tim Knowles is one of the architects of the Boston teacher residency model, in which the city of Boston takes the right to, not takes, but assumes the right to credential its teaching force, as opposed to letting its universities. Because universities were producing folk who weren't tough enough to stay in Boston, didn't understand what was needed, so the city decided to do it on its own, right? Those students, I don't know, they must have had 5 graduating classes. Their retention rate is far above the retention rate of previous students. It's important that you start in the classroom early. The old way used to be you did your student teaching in your junior or senior year. No, you start student teaching as soon as you declare yourself to be an education major. One of the things that I respect in our UTEP program, if I have this wrong, Melissa or somebody correct me, is that our faculty stay with our students 2 years after they graduate, right? 3. Yeah, I wasn't sure, right? But the notion is if you're a faculty in a school of education, once you graduate somebody out there, you just don't let them go out there. You continue to be a consulting teacher for those people so that you have much longer and greater continuity of support. Those are at least some of the elements. And one of the things I think that a lot of schools are learning to do related to this issue of preparation, the stronger young teachers need to come into schools in clusters, right? Because you go into a demoralized school by yourself, where you're the only person willing to work that 14-hour day, you become a pariah and they will eat you up. They will just eat you up. So you need to bring your own community with you, because these schools may not have community to give you. Where was we were?
I'm going to squeeze in just one announcement. Would kids in neighborhood schools, students be sure to sign in on the sheet over on the table at the far side of the room there before you go? And question, I wonder if you could just elaborate a little bit on some of your own thoughts about what's wrong with even the best systems in the U.S. Just a little public remarks on coordination there, given the reports on freedom schools, educational experiments, just trying to cultivate creativity, even in these elements, and so forth. So, just wanted to invite you to expand a little bit on your reading.
I'm not going to, if I think of what, I enjoy the students I teach here, I respect the students I teach here. I've taught at 3 or 4 of the country's better universities, Duke, Williams, Northwestern. At most of them, and again, I've enjoyed all of them, right? At most of them, if it is the lack of genuine analytical capacity, right? When I say what I understand genuine analytical capacity to mean, if you do not understand your own intellectual presets, if you don't have a sense of what your intellectual biases are, if you don't know what ideology is coloring your thinking, then the rest of what you do is likely to be fairly shallow, right? And so the degree to which the university students that I've taught at those places buy into the various complicated ideologies of privilege continues to frustrate me, right? I mean, on almost daily basis. On too frequent basis, I see good, young, well-meaning, want to change the world, got real heart, young folk going out in these neighborhoods, but they go out into these neighborhoods and the people are right. We carry this damn place with us in the wrong way, right? We really do think we're smarter than they are, right? We've been told that so many times. We've been told we've gone to the best schools, we read all the books, we had the best professors. We carry that with us. We communicate that to people. There's a kind of built-in dysfunction in elite education, because if you communicate your eliteness, you cut yourself off from the people you have to work with, right? It is difficult often to get students who have been trained in the lap of privilege to be able to analyze privileged education. I mean, that's a part of what I find frustrating, okay? Wasn't there a hand over here in this corner? Let me see if there's anyone who hasn't spoken. Was there?
What sort of specific capacity building measures can we take with teachers that we already have?
Specific capacity building that we can take with teachers. And you know, on this one, I do want some people to chime in, because some of you ought to think about it. Melissa, would you? Yeah. And oh, Bob's going. Stand up, would you, please?
It's a science, and the best teachers approach it as if it's an art and a science. You have this idea that you go in and you become a great teacher. I'd love to find that program, but you stick with it and work hard at it and become good at it. Have a toolbox that they go that they agree with you. And as much as you're talking about what we know now about the importance of school communities, what people are finding is that good communities of teachers work as a community of people. They do not work as individual people. And they have a really good toolkit that helps us figure out how to do the things that we do. I was talking a month ago. When we have reading problems in urban schools, we buy a computer program called V180, which most of the evaluations say works for only several kids. But we do that because we don't really want to go through the process of teaching our teachers how to teach reading, which is one of the most, it's like brain surgery. It's one of the most incredibly important things that we can do. And everybody in this room could be taught to teach people reading. It's not that hard. It takes an enormous amount of work and an enormous amount of science, and I think that's what I'm talking about when we're trying to build capacity. Creating whole groups of people that are working together to build capacity, but also beginning to see teaching as a science that it is.
I think it's good. I mean, what I add to that, assuming in all cases good execution, one of the models of the UC charters is that practice is public. Classrooms have to be open to your colleagues. If that's all you do, it means teachers are going to be better prepared than they would be if your colleagues weren't likely to drop in. Coaching models, the countries drift away from coaching models. It's the old, we tried coaching and it didn't happen. No, you tried inept coaching and it didn't happen. When teachers have access to an instructional specialist who knows more than they, and when you can take a teacher's class and get better results with her students than she gets from her students, you can turn that teacher's head around, because that takes all the excuses away about what these kids can and cannot do, right? Teachers need to be exposed to multiple models. I think it was Lisa Delpit who gave me this metaphor about the good teacher is not the one who does direct instruction or the one who does progressive inquiry-based experiential. It's the one who has both of them in the back pocket, right? And can analyze the situation and child and say, for this child, it's this method. For this child, it's another method, right? And teachers have to be exposed to a lot of that. Did you want to say something else, add to that, Melissa?
No, I mean, I think you're right. And I think, talk about Dick Elmore a little bit. What he's saying is we've made enormous progress in K-3 education, not Chicago, but everywhere else. That's both understanding the investment in preschool. It's also understanding that the people who are in front of the classroom need to know how to teach reading and providing a lot of professional development. And most of our progress in reading came from the idea that we don't do just phonics or whole language. We actually learn how kids read and start doing it. It's not rocket science, but it's really important. And so I think what we're doing is we're assuming that teachers walk into a classroom, they're going to know how to teach. I'd love to find a brain surgeon that can walk out of medical school, walk into a surgery room, and do brain surgery. And to me, teaching reading is brain surgery.
And to take one other idea from Elmore's been an advocate for the idea that at every level of leadership, we should select the people who can demonstrate that they can improve instructional capacity in the people below them. So that principals should only be selected from among folk who've already demonstrated that they can improve the instructional capacity of teachers, and administrators should only be selected from principals who have, and on and on and on and on, right? It's a simple idea, but I like to come back to it. Was there another? Oh, I'm sorry, over here.
Could you talk a little bit about federal education policy, and how do you rank Duncan with some of your criteria?
How do I rank Duncan? Melissa, you want that one? Where you go? Chicken. How do you rate Arnie Duncan is the short version.
Paul.
You're good, Melissa. If you go back to Catalyst at the time that he was promoted, they did this really incisive pluses and minuses, and I just remember it was very balanced. And I can't do it from memory with a lot of precision, but some of it I've already said. On some of the strongest measures of academic achievement, Chicago did not progress greatly during his tenure, right? That's the NAEP. It did, yeah, stay there, make sure I get it all right. It did make some progress on the ISAT, on the state test, that's not irrelevant, but again, it doesn't predict better life outcomes except at the extremes, right? If the kids who exceed on the NAEPs, they'll be okay. So there was not a lot of progress academically. The high schools, you say they got better? Under Arnie, okay. Okay, well, I did not have a sense of that, but nobody knows any more about Chicago high schools. thing I think, I wasn't in Chicago during most of the administration, but I'm fairly certain about this. The thing I appreciated about his style when he was in Chicago was the non-ideological character of it. The way in which he would take ideas from here and take ideas from there, put them out and see what happens. The last panel that I was on, that he was on, was with a group of students from Voice, or that Voices of Youth in Chicago Education, and these are high school students who had worked out a plan for reducing dropout rates, and he had funded it, right? There are not a whole lot of superintendents in the country who would have done that. I think his signature achievement in this country is probably the reduction, in this city, was the reduction of the dropout rate and the improvement of the graduation rate. He had respect for research and began to move the city in the direction, again, I'm speaking slowly because it's a slow process, but began to move the city's decision-making structure in the direction of looking at the data. So, please, 1, 2.
I had an honor of being in SSA. The question that I have is really, what about the conversations about the integration of mental health professionals and educators and administrators in schools? You know, this comes to mind because I understand definitely the importance and the value of teachers and staff building relationships, but also the dangers of them kind of either pathologizing or branding students without integrating kind of the supports of community mental health specialists.
Say the last, without the supports of?
Community mental health specialists. So you know, either school social works or community mental health centers.
Oh, right. The capacity in the system at both upper levels and lower levels, downtown and individual schools, to appreciate and to utilize mental health services, I mean, to me, it looks virtually non-existent. I mean, I don't see. I'm not trying to be funny. I mean, I wish it were a joke. I mean, I don't see people struggling and thinking about, I mean, some principals. I got into Woodlawn for principals and Bishop Brazier beating up on us about the lack of mental health services for students in those schools. They see it, and they, you know, the good principals see it and experience it in a visceral way. But there are so few places that they can go. That conversation, there's about this much conversation in this city. Barbara Easton Watkins, before she left, was trying to systematically figure out a way to do that. She wanted to do a resources follow needs. We don't have enough social workers. We don't have enough mental health professionals. Let's take the ones we do have and concentrate them in the neediest schools. That's one of the things she was working on before she left the system. It's an enormous problem. Wasn't there one other hand over there? Please.
You mentioned a couple of different school districts that improved their dropout rates and their tuition. And I've heard about that improvement, but what about the question of the push out? So pushing students out so that the school system looks better, but not really accounting for all these students who are no longer there, that schools just wanted to get rid of because they were challenging.
Well, and again, you know, one of the things that's happened that the consortium has done is spawned, I don't know, I think the last I knew, 20 different states or cities were trying to create consortia-like entities. One of the roles that the consortium has come to play, it's been a long, difficult process, is the process of fair referee, so that when, in Chicago, the numbers get vetted by independent research professionals, so that we're fairly confident that the numbers do represent the difference between the kids who started freshman year and the kids who came out senior year. That's not true every place. Until very, very recently, I was awfully suspicious of the dropout numbers for New York because they were I thought they were cooking the books in various ways. So all that I can say is that while the dropout figures are extremely important, you almost have to know the culture of the city before you know whether you can trust the data from that city. You have to sort of know who is verifying the data because there are just so many ways to mess up those numbers. Okay. We've gotten the cut sign. Go home, be warm. Let me again say, it is just wonderful to see that so many folk are concerned about this set of questions in this kind of weather. So thank you very much.